In the sprawling, heavily guarded Moretti estate, the staff didn't fear the ruthless syndicate boss who controlled the city's underworld. They feared his fiancée. Genevieve Croft was a beautifully polished nightmare, crushing anyone who crossed her. Until a new maid named Nora walked through the doors and changed everything. The Moretti compound sat like a fortress on the jagged cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island. Wrought iron gates, armed patrols, and high stone walls kept the world out. But for the 50-odd staff members living inside, those walls were a prison. They worked for Christian Moretti, a man whose name was whispered with equal parts reverence and terror in the boardrooms and back alleys of the East Coast. Yet, within the gilded halls of the estate, Christian was a ghost, a silent, brooding presence, preoccupied with a brewing syndicate war. The real terror of the house wore vintage Chanel and possessed a smile that didn't quite reach her ice-blue eyes. Her name was Genevieve Croft. Genevieve was the daughter of a prominent, corrupt state senator. Her engagement to Christian was a tactical alliance, a merging of political immunity and underworld muscle. But Genevieve treated the estate as her personal kingdom and the staff as her serfs. In the 3 months she had resided there, she had fired 6 maids, hospitalized a gardener for speaking out of turn, and created an atmosphere so suffocating that the kitchen staff communicated purely in terrified whispers. Enter Nora Hayes. Nora didn't want to be a maid, let alone in a Mafia stronghold. But her younger brother, a foolish college student with a penchant for high-stakes poker, had racked up a crippling debt in one of the Moretti-controlled underground casinos. When the enforcers came knocking, Nora had marched straight to Matteo, Christian's formidable underboss, and brokered a deal. She would work off the debt inside the estate, effectively giving herself as collateral. Matteo, amused by her sheer audacity, agreed. On Nora's first day, the head housekeeper, an older woman named Lucille, who walked with a permanent nervous stoop, gave her the single most important rule of the house. "Keep your eyes on the floor, Nora," Lucille warned, her hands trembling as she handed Nora a set of master keys. "When Mr. Moretti is in the room, you are invisible. But when Miss Croft is in the room, you are less than invisible. You are nothing. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look at her jewelry. And whatever you do not let her catch you looking at Mr. Moretti." Nora nodded, slipping the keys into her apron. She was 24, sharp-witted, and hardened by a life of scraping by in South Boston. She wasn't easily intimidated by wealth or cruelty. But within 4 hours of her shift, she understood exactly what Lucille meant. It happened in the grand foyer, a massive expanse of imported Italian marble beneath a glittering baccarat crystal chandelier. A young maid named Sarah was polishing the banister when Genevieve swept down the stairs, flanked by her personal bodyguard, Silas, a hulking brute who answered only to her. Genevieve stopped abruptly. She reached out and ran a manicured finger along the mahogany wood. "Dust," Genevieve said softly. Her voice was pure velvet, making the word sound almost musical. I just polished it, Miss Croft," Sarah stammered, her face draining of color. Genevieve's smile widened. She stepped closer to the trembling girl. "Are you calling me a liar, Sarah?" No, Mum, I just—" "Silas," Genevieve murmured, not breaking eye contact with the maid. Sarah's hands seem to be defective. They can't clean properly. Perhaps she doesn't need them. Silas stepped forward, grabbing Sarah by the wrist. The young girl let out a choked sob, falling to her knees. The rest of the staff in the foyer froze, paralyzed by fear. No one moved. No one breathed. Nora, who had been dusting the windowsills across the room, felt a cold fury ignite in her chest. She knew how bullies operated. If Sarah begged, it would only fuel Genevieve's sadistic high. Nora had to redirect the attention, and she had to do it flawlessly. Without hesitating, Nora turned and accidentally knocked her elbow against a towering, pedestal-mounted, antique porcelain vase. The crash was deafening. Thousands of dollars of centuries-old porcelain shattered across the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot through the foyer. Genevieve whipped her head around, her elegant features twisting into a mask of absolute rage. Silas dropped Sarah's arm, instinctively reaching inside his jacket for his weapon. "Who did that?" Genevieve hissed, her eyes locking onto Nora. Nora immediately dropped to her knees among the sharp shards, bowing her head in perfect subservient panic. "I am so incredibly sorry, Miss Croft. I slipped. It was entirely my fault. I am so clumsy. Please forgive me." Genevieve stalked toward her, the click-clack of her Louboutin heels sounding like a countdown. She stopped just inches from Nora, her toe nudging a sharp piece of porcelain. "Look at me," Genevieve commanded. Nora slowly raised her head, keeping her expression perfectly blank, an empty vessel of apologies. "Do you know how much this vase cost, you stupid little girl?" Genevieve's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "It costs more than your miserable life." She raised her hand, fully intending to strike Nora across the face. Nora braced herself, her jaw clenching, calculating the trajectory of the slap. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was low, gravelly, and commanded absolute silence. Christian Moretti stood at the top of the stairs. He wore a crisp Tom Ford suit, no tie, the top two buttons of his shirt undone. He was striking, sharp jawline, dark hair slightly disheveled, but it was his eyes that commanded the room. They were a piercing, stormy grey, currently scanning the wreckage in the foyer. Instantly, Genevieve's entire demeanour shifted. The cruel lines of her face smoothed into a pout of distressed innocence. She sighed heavily, stepping away from Nora and looking up at Christian. "Oh, darling," Genevieve cooed, her voice practically dripping with honey. "It's a disaster. The new maid was careless and destroyed the Ming vase your mother loved. I was just reprimanding her." Christian slowly descended the stairs. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look at Genevieve. He walked straight to where Nora was kneeling among the broken shards. He stopped, looking down at her. Nora kept her chin up, meeting his stormy gaze. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity. Staff members usually stared at his shoes, trembling. This girl was looking him dead in the eye, and she wasn't afraid. "Clean it up," Christian said flatly to Nora. He then turned to Genevieve. "It's a vase, Genevieve. I have a shipment of weapons arriving from the port of Miami tonight, and the cartel breathing down my neck. Don't waste my time with broken pottery." Genevieve's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her jaw tightening. "Of course, Christian. I'll handle the staff." "See that you do." "Without the theatrics," he replied, brushing past her and walking out the front door, Matteo trailing closely behind him. As the heavy oak doors clicked shut, Genevieve turned back to Nora. The angelic facade was gone. "You're lucky he's busy," Genevieve whispered, leaning in so only Nora could hear. "But I'm not." "Watch your back, little maid. You just put a target on it." Nora lowered her head, beginning to pick up the shards. She had saved Sarah, but she had just engaged in a deadly game of chess with the future queen of the syndicate. For the next 3 weeks, Nora became a ghost. She learned the rhythms of the estate with militant precision, memorizing Genevieve's schedule so she could operate in the rooms the fiancé had just vacated. Nora realized quickly that Genevieve wasn't just a spoiled politician's daughter. She was a deeply paranoid, highly intelligent woman who ran the household like an intelligence agency. She had staff members spying on other staff members, breeding an environment of deep mistrust. Nora refused to play the game. She kept her head down, worked double shifts, and spent her meager breaks reading in the dimly lit pantry. But her sheer competence eventually betrayed her. Lucille, desperate for reliable help, assigned Nora to the night shift for the West Wing, the wing that housed Christian Moretti's private study. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. A heavy thunderstorm was battering the Rhode Island coast, lightning illuminating the sprawling library, where Nora was quietly dusting the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The heavy mahogany doors creaked open. Nora froze, shrinking back into the shadows of the shelves. Christian walked in. He looked exhausted. He shrugged off his suit jacket, tossing it over a leather armchair, and walked straight to the crystal decanters on a side table. He poured himself a generous measure of Macallan 25, knocking it back in one swift motion before pouring another. He leaned against the heavy oak desk, running a hand over his face. Nora knew she shouldn't be there. She was supposed to slip out unnoticed. But as she took a quiet step toward the door, her shoe squeaked slightly on the polished hardwood. Christian's head snapped up, his hand instantly flying to the holster at his hip. "Step into the light," he ordered, his voice echoing menacingly in the large room. Nora stepped out from the shadows of the bookshelves, her hands visible by her sides. "I apologize, Mr. Moretti. I was just finishing the dusting. I'll leave immediately." Christian stared at her, his hand slowly dropping from his weapon. He recognized her, the girl from the foyer with the broken vase. "You're working late," he noted, his tone unreadable. "I prefer the quiet, sir," Nora replied evenly. Christian took a sip of his whiskey, studying her. "You don't shake when you talk to me. Everyone in this house shakes." "Shaking makes it harder to dust, Mr. Moretti," Nora replied, a hint of dry wit slipping through before she could stop it. A momentary pause hung in the air, thick with the sound of rain lashing against the windows. To Nora's shock, the corner of Christian's mouth twitched upward. It was the ghost of a smile. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nora. Nora Hayes." "Well, Nora Hayes, since you're here, pour me another drink. My hands are tired." Nora walked over to the side table, picked up the heavy crystal decanter, and poured exactly 2 fingers of the amber liquid into his glass. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed slightly. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, the hands of a fighter, not an aristocrat. "Do you know why I'm awake at 2 in the morning, Nora?" Christian asked, looking into his glass. It was a rhetorical question, but he seemed to crave a sounding board. "Because I have a rat. Someone is leaking my shipment routes to the Costa family. 2 of my trucks were hijacked this week. Millions gone. Blood on the streets." Nora kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. The Costa family was the Moretti's biggest rival. "Perhaps," Nora said carefully, "the leak isn't coming from the streets, sir. Sometimes the most dangerous leaks come from inside the house. People look at the foundation when there's a crack, but sometimes the roof is caving in." Christian's eyes snapped to hers, narrowing. He stepped closer, towering over her. "That's a bold analogy for a maid." "I clean houses, sir. I know how they fall apart," she replied, holding her ground. Christian stared at her for a long moment, the intensity in his eyes enough to make anyone crumble, but he just nodded slowly. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Mr. Moretti." Nora slipped out of the room, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had crossed a line, but she had planted a seed. 2 days later, That seed began to sprout into a deadly reality. Nora was tasked with deep cleaning Genevieve's private dressing room, a massive suite filled with thousands of dollars of haute couture. Genevieve had left for a luncheon in the city, leaving the estate relatively peaceful. While vacuuming under a velvet chaise lounge, Nora's hand brushed against something hard taped to the underside of the furniture. Frowning, she peeled back the tape. It was a sleek, black burner phone. Nora's breath hitched. She knew the rules of survival. See nothing, hear nothing. Put it back. But her curiosity and the memory of Christian's exhausted face in the study got the better of her. She pressed the power button. It wasn't locked. There was only one text thread. Nora opened it and read the latest message, sent from Genevieve just an hour ago. He's moving the weapons cache to the warehouse at Pier 44 tonight at midnight. He will be there personally with a small security detail. Take him out. Once he's gone, my father will step in to manage the syndicate's transition, and the Costas get the docks. Ice flooded Nora's veins. Genevieve wasn't just a cruel bully. She was the rat. She was conspiring with her politician father and the rival Costa family to assassinate Christian and stage a coup. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the dressing room swung open. "I forgot my diamond tennis bracelet," Genevieve's voice rang out, sharp and irritated. Nora panicked. She shoved the burner phone deep into the pocket of her apron and grabbed her feather duster, violently dusting a rack of silk blouses just as Genevieve stepped into the room. Genevieve stopped. Her eyes darted from Nora to the slightly moved velvet chaise lounge, and then to the terrified stiffness in Nora's posture. Genevieve was a predator, and she could smell fear. "What are you doing in here?" Genevieve demanded, stepping into the room, Silas looming like a shadow behind her. "Deep cleaning, Miss Croft, as instructed by Lucille," Nora said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Genevieve walked slowly toward the chaise lounge. She knelt down, reaching underneath it. Her hand grasped empty air. When Genevieve stood up, the mask of the polished socialite was entirely gone. What replaced it was a cold, venomous killer. She slowly turned to face Nora. "Silas," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a terrifying deadpan. "Lock the door." The heavy click of the deadbolt sounded like a guillotine dropping. "You found something that doesn't belong to you," Genevieve whispered, stalking toward Nora. "And now I am going to have Silas break every bone in your hands, pull out your teeth one by one, and dump your body in the Atlantic. Unless you hand it over right now." Nora's mind raced. If she handed over the phone, she was dead anyway. Genevieve could never let her live knowing her secret. Nora backed up against the wall, her hand slipping into her apron pocket, gripping the small black phone. "I don't know what you're talking about," Nora lied smoothly, staring directly into Genevieve's eyes. Genevieve sneered. "Have it your way. Silas, take her down." The massive bodyguard lunged forward, grabbing Nora by the throat and slamming her against the floral wallpapered wall. Nora gasped for air, kicking wildly, but his grip was like iron. Black spots danced in her vision. "Miss Croft!" A sharp, authoritative voice suddenly echoed through the heavy wooden door, followed by 3 loud knocks. It was Matteo, the underboss. "Mr. Moretti has returned early. He is requesting you in the drawing room immediately." Genevieve cursed under her breath. She signaled Silas, who dropped Nora. Nora collapsed to the plush carpet, gasping violently, clutching her bruised throat. Genevieve crouched down next to Nora, grabbing her by the hair and pulling her face close. "This isn't over," Genevieve hissed. "You say one word, you breathe a little too loud, and I will find that pathetic, gambling addict brother of yours, and I will send him to you in pieces. Do you understand me?" Nora, tears of pain pricking her eyes, didn't nod. She just stared at Genevieve. Genevieve released her hair, stood up, smoothed her designer skirt, and walked out the door with Silas, leaving Nora on the floor. As the door clicked shut, Nora pulled the burner phone from her pocket. She was trapped in the lion's den, caught between a ruthless Mafia boss and his treacherous, sociopathic fiancé. But Genevieve had made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed Nora was a victim. Nora pushed herself off the floor, slipping the phone into her bra. She wasn't going to run. She was going to burn Genevieve Croft's empire to the ground. The antique grandfather clock in the grand hallway chimed 10. Nora sat on the edge of her narrow cot, her fingers gently tracing the dark, violent bruises Silas had left around her throat. She stared at the sleek black burner phone, resting in her lap. The message from Genevieve to the Costa family was a definitive death warrant. "He's moving the weapons to Pier 44 tonight at midnight. Take him out." Nora knew she couldn't go straight to Christian Moretti. Genevieve had eyes everywhere: the kitchen staff, the groundskeepers, even the lower-level security detail. If Nora stepped out of line, she'd be dead before she ever reached his study. She needed Matteo, the fiercely loyal underboss. Slipping into an oversized dark hoodie that swallowed her maid's uniform, Nora bypassed the main internal corridors. She took the treacherous, rain-slicked cliffside stairs down to the subterranean garage. The air was thick with the smell of motor oil and incoming sea fog. She slipped behind a concrete pillar, waiting until two armed enforcers walked past, before darting toward a heavily armored Cadillac Escalade. Matteo was standing by the trunk, methodically loading a high-capacity magazine into an assault rifle. "Mr. Matteo," Nora whispered, stepping into the dim overhead light with her hands raised high. Matteo whipped around, the rifle instantly leveled directly at her chest. "Give me one good reason not to put you in the ground, Nora. You know this area is restricted." "Pier 44 is a trap," she said, her voice raspy and painful from her bruised vocal cords. "The Costas know you're moving the cash. They're waiting for him." Matteo didn't lower the gun. "Only 5 men in this syndicate know that route. How does a maid know?" "Because the leak isn't one of your men." Nora slowly reached into her pocket and slid the burner phone across the polished hood of the Escalade. "It's Genevieve. She's working with her father and Judge Thomas Caldwell to pull all the state police patrols away from the Providence docks tonight." Matteo snatched the phone, his eyes scanning the damning text thread. The hardened mobster went completely pale. He keyed his shoulder radio immediately. "Change of plans. Hold the transport. Get the boss to the war room." 20 miles away, Pier 44 was swallowed by an eerie, unnatural fog. The Providence docks had been completely cleared thanks to a phantom containment order signed by the deeply corrupt Judge Caldwell. With the cops sidelined, the Costa family had outsourced the heavy lifting of the hit to the Hells Angels, a notorious motorcycle club looking to violently expand their East Coast territory. Dozens of heavily armed bikers were hidden among the rusted shipping containers, waiting in absolute silence. At exactly midnight, 3 black SUVs rolled onto the pier. A deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the night. The Hells Angels unleashed absolute hell, shredding the armored vehicles with heavy-caliber rounds. The ambush was ruthless and precise. When the smoke finally began to clear, the lead biker cautiously approached the decimated front SUV to confirm the Mafia boss's death. He wrenched the ruined door open. The driver's seat was empty. In the back seat sat a single, blinking block of C4 explosives next to a hand-painted sign. "Checkmate." The explosion rocked the waterfront, blowing the SUV into twisted shrapnel. But it was only a signal. From the dark waters of the harbor, Moretti assault boats silently glided to the docks, and dozens of Christian's elite men poured out of the shadows. The ambushers were brutally outmaneuvered and outgunned. The Syndicate war was over before the Costas even knew they had lost. Far away from the blood-soaked docks, in the fortified war room of the Newport estate, Christian Moretti turned away from the live drone feed of the pier. He walked slowly over to where Nora sat quietly in the corner. He reached out, his rough, calloused fingers gently brushing the ugly purple bruises on her neck. The touch was shockingly tender, a sharp contrast to the violence unfolding on the screens behind him. "You saved my life, Nora," Christian murmured, his stormy grey eyes burning with a dangerous, intense heat. "You saved my entire empire. Why?" "Because a rat in the house brings the whole roof down," she whispered, her breath catching as he stepped impossibly close, the air between them suddenly heavy with unspoken tension. "Tomorrow," Christian said softly, his gaze dropping to her lips for a lingering second. "We handle the Viper." The morning sun pierced the heavy velvet curtains of the Newport estate, illuminating a brilliantly manufactured tragedy. In the grand parlour, Genevieve Croft sat in an impeccably tailored black Dior morning dress, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her father, Senator Robert Croft, stood by the marble fireplace, pouring himself a generous measure of Pappy Van Winkle bourbon. According to the encrypted messages Genevieve had received from her Costa contacts, Christian's convoy had been obliterated by the Hells Angels. The Syndicate was officially decapitated. "A devastating loss, my dear," Senator Croft said smoothly, raising his crystal glass. "But the city requires stability. The Moretti captains will look to you, the grieving widow, and through you, to me. Judge Caldwell has already drafted the injunctions to freeze Christian's legitimate assets. We will transition the Port Authority to the Costas seamlessly." Genevieve offered a cold, triumphant smirk, dropping the lace handkerchief into her lap. It was almost too easy. Christian was a brute. He lacked the necessary political refinement. He also lacked a pulse, or so you thought. A dark, gravelly voice echoed from the arched doorway. Genevieve's blood ran ice-cold. The crystal glass slipped from the senator's hand, shattering against the stone hearth. Christian Moretti stood in the doorway, completely unscathed, wearing a sharp charcoal suit. Flanking him was Matteo, holding a suppressed tactical handgun, and Silas, Genevieve's supposedly loyal, hulking bodyguard, who was currently bound, gagged, and bleeding from a fractured jaw, held up by two enforcers. Genevieve shot up from the sofa, her face an absolute mask of terror. "Christian! Oh my God, darling. The local police called. They said there was an explosion at the pier. Drop the act, Genevieve." Christian cut her off, his voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. He walked slowly toward her, a predator cornering its prey. "The performance is over." He snapped his fingers. From the hallway, Nora stepped into the grand parlour. She wasn't wearing her stiff maid's uniform. Matteo had provided her with a sleek, black silk blouse and fitted trousers. She looked elegant, dangerous, and entirely unbound. Genevieve's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as she looked at the woman she had ordered strangled just hours ago. "You!" Genevieve hissed, the facade of the grieving widow instantly replaced by unhinged malice. "You filthy little—" "Careful," Christian warned, stepping seamlessly between Nora and Genevieve. "You're speaking to the woman who holds your life in her hands." Christian tossed the black burner phone onto the glass coffee table. "We intercepted the hit squad. The Hells Angels are currently singing like canaries in a federal holding cell. Judge Caldwell was arrested by the FBI at his country club at dawn." Senator Croft stepped forward, attempting a desperate salvage. "Christian, listen. I am a United States Senator. You cannot touch me without bringing the wrath of the Department of Justice down on your head." "I don't need to touch you, Robert," Christian replied with a dark smile, "because Special Agent David Reynolds of the FBI's Anti-Corruption Task Force is waiting in the driveway." Right on cue, the wail of sirens echoed across the estate. Genevieve turned her venomous glare to Nora. "You think you've won? You're a maid, a nobody. He will use you and throw you away." Nora stepped out from behind Christian, closing the distance. "I may have started as a maid," Nora said, her voice steady with the sweet ring of absolute karma. "But I know how to clean up trash, and you are the biggest piece of trash in this house." Genevieve lunged, raising her hand to strike, but Christian caught her wrist mid-air, his grip tightening until she whimpered. He shoved her toward the enforcers. "Hand her over to the feds. Let her rot next to her father." As the screaming, thrashing heiress was dragged away, the heavy oak doors slammed shut. The storm had finally passed. Christian loosened his tie, his stormy grey eyes melting into a profound, burning respect as he looked at Nora. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her cheekbone, avoiding the bruises. "You overthrew a political dynasty in under a month," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "I owe you my life, Nora, and I think this syndicate needs a different kind of queen." He leaned in, his lips claiming hers in a dangerous, undeniable promise. Nora kissed him back, cementing her place not in the shadows, but on the throne. The glass castle on the cliffs remained, but the viper was gone. Genevieve Croft learned that true power isn't demanded through cruelty. It is earned through loyalty. Nora Hayes started as a pawn, a maid trapped in a deadly game, but she outplayed the queen. In the ruthless world of the Moretti Syndicate, everyone finally knew exactly who to fear, and it certainly wasn't the former fiancé.